Hello, welcome to this session. In this session, I am going to talk about Spring Web MVC. Already, the architecture of Spring Web MVC is discussed, but to start with, I am again going to uh, discuss that architecture once again so that we can work and see everything in programming. So let's discuss that architecture once again. So this is basically the web MVC architecture in a Spring. So analyze all the parts. First of all, the user sends any request. That request is actually processed by this front controller. So one thing is very clear here, all the incoming requests should be entertained by this front controller. What is the front controller available in case of web MVC? This is called dispatcher servlet. So the dispatcher servlet is a front controller in Spring MVC. So let's write down this point. Dispatcher servlet is nothing but the front controller. Okay, so that is what the front controller is. Let's drag and drop it on the next page. Okay, so we have enough space to write. Now, so all the requests will be entertained by this dispatcher servlet. So first of all, we need to configure this dispatcher servlet and then we need to proceed further. Okay, now once the dispatcher servlet receive this request, then it need to delegate the request to some backend controller. So any backend controller or the controller can be any class. So this controller or normally backend controller is any class that is annotated with @controller. So if we have any class that is annotated with @controller annotation, then it works like a backend controller. Now this front controller need to delegate the request to one of the backend controller. Now how this front controller take this decision? This decision is taken on the base of now all the backend controller should have one extra annotation which is called request mapping, and here we specify the URL. Now this front controller read this request mapping, and then on the basis of this URL, this particular request is delegate to one particular controller. So this front end controller comes to know that which particular backend controller will handle this request. Now to handle the request, this only the URL is not sufficient. If we go in the servlet conception, the URL actually specify the servlet which will handle the request, but the servlet has many methods like doGet and doPost. So which method will handle the request, that depends upon the request is generated by which HTTP method. So if the request is generated by HTTP post method, then do post comes in picture. If the request is generated by HTTP get method, then do get method comes in picture. The same scenario happens here. If the request, this incoming request is generated by get method, then there should be a method inside the backend controller which will handle the get request. If this incoming request is generated by the post method, then backend controller must have a method which will handle the get request or the post request. So how to specify that this particular method will handle which kind of request? So there are two annotations basically used: post mapping and get mapping. Now these two mappings is applied on method. This is applied on method. So the backend controller must have a method which may be either annotated with the post mapping or may be annotated by the get mapping, and then the front end controller come to know that which particular method in the backend controller will handle this particular request. So the request will be delegated to corresponding method. Now so that delegation is done. After that delegation, this front end controller may return something. In the sense that the delegation is successful, the request is handed over to this controller. Now controller will process the request and finally it generates the response. That response is not directly sent to the client. The response is again sent back to the front controller. Now the front controller will see that what this response is. That means the backend controller is directly sending the response, or it is sending something logically. So if something is sent logically, then this front end controller need to resolve it, because that is logical. So that logical thing means the front end controller need to know that what is actual request with respect to this logical name. So that logical name will be resolved, and that after the resolving it will return the response. So the controller, the backend controller can send various kind of response to the front end controller, and then the front end controller send the response back to the client. But before sending the response, it might possible that there is a need of resolving the logical name to the physical name. So that is what done by this front controller. Once the logical name is converted into the actual physical name, that actual physical name, the physical resource, will be rendered and sent back to the client as a response. So this is the whole scenario. Let's enable it one by one so that we can understand this architecture in a better way. So I'm just minimizing it, and whenever we require we will refer this architecture again and again during the session. So let's first of all we need to create a application. So here I am going to create a dynamic web app, project, because this time I am discussing Spring in web. So my application name is very simple: login application. Fine. And whenever we are dealing with any kind of web project, we need a server. One server is automatically configured here, that is Pivotal TC server. It is given by this it is already given by this Spring tool software. But if you want to configure any other server like Apache Tomcat and all those things, then you can go to this new runtime. You can find Apache here, and then you can configure it, whatever version you want to configure. But this Pivotal TC server is good, so let's work on this one. Next. To configure everything, I require this web.xml part, so let's generate it and finish. Okay, so this is login application. This is a plain and simple web application. Till now I didn't do anything regarding the Spring, so I need to convert it into the Spring framework. So first of all, we need to go to the properties, Java build path, libraries, add external jar files, and all the files related to the Spring. I'm just adding it. At the same time, I require one more thing. I just go copy all the jar files, the same jar files, and that I'm going to put in the web content web inf lib folder. So just pasting it out. So the first task which I have done, like setting the libraries in Java build path here, libraries, that is done because this IDE required to know where is this jar files, and the lib. Why I am putting everything in the lib? Because the server also want to know where is this jar file when it is deployed on the server. So that two things we need to do. Now let's open this web.xml first, and the first task we need to do as per this architecture demands, we need to configure this front controller, and already we have discussed that the front controller is a dispatcher servlet. So let's configure that one. So that is servlet, and the servlet, we have the servlet name. Servlet name I'm just keeping as a dispatcher. So I can do this automatically because this particular ID is giving me a way to do this automatically. So I need to have this dispatcher servlet configuration. So let's do this. So what is this? If you look at this configuration, you will come to know what is happening here. I have a servlet name. Let me simplify it, dispatcher, and also the same thing I copy here. Okay, so what happens, the name of the servlet is dispatcher, and this is the dispatcher servlet. So org.springframework.web.servlet.dispatcher servlet, this is the servlet which I need to configure as a front controller. Now whenever we are configuring this as a front controller, we need to specify something which is as a context location. The context location is the location of configuration file regarding the Spring. So we will talk it about a little bit later. Next is the servlet mapping. The servlet mapping, this is servlet name, that is dispatcher, and as this architecture demands, all the incoming requests should go through this front controller. So we are going to write URL as a slash. So all the request will go through this front controller. So the front controller is already configured. Now we are going to configure one more thing, that is called the context loader listener. Now this context loader listener is used to bootstrap the root web application context before the servlet initialization. that means basically it actually loads out all the container that IOC container into memory before the sublet comes in picture. So if we are dealing with the Spring, that IOC containers should be available in the main memory before this web application works. So that is what we have done. So we are going to add a listener here. That listener is context loader listener, and then we are going to specify where is the configuration file regarding this context, the whole context. Here we are going to specify the configuration file regarding this sublet only, but here we are going to specify the the configuration file regarding the whole context. So the location I'm going to mention here is web-inf / application context.xml. If we have more than one file which is related to the application context, then we can add it by separating the name with a space, but this time that is not required. And here we are going to specify web-inf So this dispatcher-sublet.xml is only limited to this dispatcher sublet, but this application context.xml is available to each and every component in this context, in this environment. So this part is done. That means the front controller is configured, that is dispatcher sublet, and regarding this dispatcher sublet we have a configuration file dispatcher sublet.xml. Also the IOC container is already loaded into the main memory, and the configuration file regarding this container or the context is also specified. So we need to create these two files. Which two files? This dispatcher sublet and application context inside this web-inf folder. So we go to web-inf folder, right click, new, other, and we are going to add this Spring configuration file. Next, first file I'm going to add is application context.xml. Okay, and I require to add one more configuration file in the same folder, web-inf, and that name is dispatcher-sublet.xml. Okay, so that two file is already available with us. So the first part of this configuration is done. That means front controller is already done. All the request mapping is done. Now let's design a backend controller. So how to design a backend controller? The backend controller will be designed in this Java resource src folder. So I'm going to create one package here, org dot controller, and here we have a controller, a class that is called login controller. So this is a plain and simple class. The name is login controller. Now what is a backend controller? As we have discussed, any backend controller is simply a class which is annotated with @ of controller annotations. So we need to annotate it with @ controller okay. So this particular class is annotated with the @ controller annotation. Now there is also one more requirement still to need to fulfill, that is that backend controllers should be annotated with request mapping with an URL, so that when this front controller need to delegate the request to this controller, it will analyze this URL and then the request will be delegated. So here I am also writing @request mapping, and I am going to specify the URL, that is login.htm. So now this controller is ready to accept request which is coming from the URL login.htm, but still there are some certain requirements. The requirement is any backend controller must have a method which can handle the request generated by HTTP GET method or HTTP POST method. So I am going to write a public string check login. Now for the time being, just I am saying return null, and what I am going to do here, this particular check login is a method. It will be called when this URL comes in picture, as well as it is the URL is generated with the post request. So I'm going to write @post mapping. Okay, so this post mapping, that means this particular method will be called if the request is coming or generated using the HTTP post method. So let's create a simple page, that is JSP page, and here the name of the JSP page I am specifying as an index, and here one form is required, form action I am giving as a login.htm, and method I am specifying as a post. Okay, so when this particular form is generated, then the form is using the post method. So the form is submitted using the post method, and to the URL, the form is submitted to the URL login.htm. So the two criteria that is fulfilled here is the URL is login.htm, so that the request will be delegated to this particular controller, because this controller is able to handle the request coming from this URL. The second thing, since this request is sent using the HTTP post method, that is why this particular method comes in picture to handle the request. So the front end controller use these two information to figure out which particular method in the controller will handle the request, and that request is delegated to this particular method. So the request generated by this form will be delegated by this particular method. Now here I have a simple form b Okay, so when this particular form is submitted, then what will happen? Let's see, there are two input box. One is used to enter the username and another is used to enter the password. So whenever this form is submitted, a request is generated, which contains two information: uname equal to whatever information we whatever username we are going to pass. Let us say the information is Atul, and another thing is and upass is equal to, let us say the password I have entered is 123. So the request is sent in this particular format to the server by using the post method. Now this request actually contains two parameters. One is the uname, whose value is Atul, and another parameter is upass, whose value is 123. So this method, which method? This check login, because this check login is actually handling this request. So this particular method must accept those parameters. So how to accept those parameters? At the rate of request param. So what is the request param coming with the request? Uname, first request param. So that is string uname, and the second request param is coming as request param upass, and that I am going to hold in upass variable. So that is how this particular method will be accepting the values or the parameter coming with the request. So that is done. We have the two username and user pass. Now let's check it out. If the uname dot equals, that is the simple login logic. Let's say Atul, I am not going to deal with the database connections and all those things. The simple static values. So upass dot equals 123, then I will return success. Else this method should return fail. Now what will happen by this return process? So if you look at this architecture again, the backend controller, after handling the request, it will send something to the front controller. That something means it basically sending the logical name for the response to the front controller. So here the logical name sent to the front controller is either the success or the failure. Now the front end controller, that means this dispatcher servlet, need to resolve that what is the meaning of the success and what is the meaning of the failure. So how to resolve these two things? So to resolve this process, to resolve this thing, the front end controller need to go to the dispatcher servlet or application context.xml in any configuration file, and in that configuration file we need to specify one thing that is called the view resolver. Now what is the view resolver? Whenever if you look at the architecture, whenever the controller is sending a model or some logical name to the front controller, then the front controller need to resolve that what is the actual resource will be sent to the client. So that resolving, that finding out the actual resource with respect to the logical one returned by the backend controller, we require the view resolver. So here I am going to use the view resolver as a class that is called the internal resource view resolver. So that thing I am going to specify use. So this is internal view resolver. Let's write it on the second line so that it will be visible. Okay. Now this internal view resolver, how it works? This internal view resolver takes out the logical name. So what is the logical name sent by the backend controller? It is success. So it is taking that success. Then that success, we are going to specify here one thing, property, and the property name is prefix, and the value I am specifying is blank. I'm not going to use any prefix. Property suffix, and the value I'm going to specify as .jsp. So what it does, this internal resource view resolver, there are various view resolvers available, but I'm going to use the simplistic one. So how it does, it takes a logical name as a parameter, and then it will prepend the prefix value with that logical name. So I have the logical name. What is that logical name? Success. Now that success is prepended by whatever be the value of prefix. Let us say the prefix value is ABC slash. In this case, or it is something like this also. Let us suppose. So in this case, this success will be prepended by slash ABC slash. So it becomes this, and then it will be appended. Something is appended in this whole thing. So what is appended? The suffix value. So what is the suffix value? It is something like .jsp. So that means this internal view resolver is giving this value to the front-end controller, and the front-end controller will figure out a success.jsp in the folder ABC, and if it is available, then that is returned back to the client. So I'm not going to write anything here. So if you look at the prepending value, it is blank. It is prepended by success, that means it is completely success, and then it is appended by the value JSP. So we need to have a success.jsp in the root folder, so that that will be returned back to the client. Similarly, we can think about this fail also. So we have to have success.jsp and fail.jsp in the root folder. So I'm going to create two files here again. JSP, one is the success, and here I'm going to write a simple application, simple message, login success, and again I'm going to create one more file, JSP, and it is fail. One thing should be noted down, that this is a case sensitive. So if we are going to write it in a cap letter, then the page name should start with a cap letter and something like that. So fail.jsp, here my message is h1 login fail. Done. So that part is done. The next part required is something specific. Now if we look at this this architecture, then the question comes in mind that how this front controller, how it is figuring out that this particular controller is handling the request. So that is where this request mapping comes for this rescue. But the question is, this particular Spring framework, this particular front controller, how it come to know that where to find the request mapping, in which particular package, in which particular class, where to find. So we need to tell the front controller to figure out in a particular package. So how to do that? First of all, we go to this namespace tab and we are going to add this context. Why, I will tell you a little bit later. Okay, and this is the default one, so let's do with this default. And if you go to the source, you can find out this line is added, and also this line is added. So what we need to do, we need to write two things. One is context annotation config, that we need to specify, and second thing we need to specify context component scan. And what component scan we will use? org.controller. Now why these two things is required? So first thing is required because we are going to specify controller by using this annotations and request mappings by using this @ of request mappings. So we are using what you can say like annotations. So the front end controller also need to know that how the controller is actually designed, by using the annotation or by using something else. So we are using annotation, that's why we require this annotation config. Now second point, front end controller also come to know that where to find those annotations to match. That means if you look at this architecture, this front controller need to know to which controller, backend controller, this particular request will be delegated. And as I told you, the request is delegated on the basis of this request mapping. But where to find this request mapping, in which particular package that particular file is kept, or that particular controller is kept, that is specified here. So what the front end controller do, it will not search in the entire project where is that request mapping is available. It go directly in this folder, in this package, and figure out which class is annotated with @ of request mapping, and then which request mapping is matched with the current request URL. So this particular URL, this particular controller will be figured out. So the request is delegated with this particular to this particular controller, right? So now everything is configured. I hope everything is done. So let's run this application and check it out whether it's working or not. So I'm going to run on the server, finish. Okay, this form is ready. So let's check it out whether the login is successful or not. So for to have the login successful, what is the condition? The condition is the username should be Atul and the password is 123. So let's add 123 as an password and Atul as an username, and let's log in. Yep, the login is successful. Now if you go back and if we supply wrong passwords, then it is login fail. So this is how the entire web MVC works in a Spring case. Okay, so this is all about this architecture and how the architecture is processed. Fine. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you.